For this month, we read Rise of the Videogame Zinesters by Anna Anthropi. I hope I said her name right. I apologize if I did not. So, right off the bat, I just want to say I did not like this book very much. And I think one of my major problems is it's about 7 years old at this point, so I might have been looking at it with the wrong mindset. If I had read this book back in 2011 or 2012, I probably would have a very different opinion than I do right now. Because a lot of this is sort of dated information, but some of the information in it is not really true. And just from looking at it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's still it's a decent read, but it's not something that I enjoyed reading at all. So what she says is she wants video games to be more video game creation to be more accessible to people, which it is now. I mean, you can do it a lot easier now because there are more tools and other things that are more commercially available. You're not going to be making the AAA big budget games by yourself. That's sort of outside of the realm of what an individual could do right now. But you can make smaller games, or you can go the route of a Stardew Valley, and you can Stardew Valley and Shovel Knight, and you can do the indie games. It'll take you a while to do it, and it's possible to do it by yourself. But if you have a team of a small team, you can do it a little bit faster. Now, my major problem is she spends a lot of time talking historically about video game creation, and a lot of what she says doesn't make a lot of sense to me. She talks a lot about, the way in which video games were coded, talking originally about assembly, but she doesn't go into other programming languages that were also created, because assembly really wasn't used extensively. Well, it wasn't used for, I would say, past the 90s or so. I think they had moved on past that. When I tried to do video game programming, I learned in Visual Basic. I wouldn't say I learned in Visual Basic. I attempted to learn in Visual Basic. I had never heard about assembly until I started doing more research on video games, and that was much later on. Also, it's computer coding language, just like any other language. It's possible for anybody to learn it. It just might take a while for you to do so. So when she says assembly was incomprehensible, well, yeah, but that's because you didn't. I'm assuming she didn't, and also I don't know myself how to program in assembly. You had to have gone to school and learned how to program in assembly. Then the language would make sense to you. Just like a layman, it would be like if I gave you a paper in Swahili. Nobody would be able to read that except for somebody who speaks Swahili. Same thing with Arabic or Chinese or anything else. In a language that you don't read or you don't understand, you obviously can't read it. And that's kind of my problem that she presents when talking about assembly. Now, some of her other arguments, at least for me, don't make a lot of sense, because you have other programs that would allow you to do very simple game creation, or allow you to tinker around with the mechanics of the games. For example, you could break, oh gosh, what is it? The first Warcraft. You could break that game by going into the editing settings once you actually went into the programs on your computer. You could edit all the units that you wanted to increase their health, increase their attack range. That was all possible back in the early 90s. So you've been able to mess with games for a while, or you've been able to create your own maps. You could do that with Doom. You could create multiplayer maps. First-person shooters have allowed you to do this for a very long time. So there's ways to tinker with the game so that you can sort of test your own programming ability. And that's sort of something that she touches on but sort of gives kind of lip service to. Also, there have been, if you wanted to make a larger game, there have been programs such as RPG Maker, which has been around for a very long time, that you could take your hand, you could try your hand at. You could create simplistic RPGs. You're not going to create grand sweeping games like Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest or Earthbound or something like that. What you could have done is also go into some DOS programs, and they would allow you to create your own level editor. I did this, gosh, back when I was like 8 or 9, so I don't really remember the name of the games. Most of them were like very simplistic maze games. So you could like create your own level layout, you could put enemies in there, you could put like the ammunition that you were going to need to fight them off, and you could program them so once you go onto a staircase it takes you down to level 2, and when you try to go back onto that staircase it would either not work at all or bring you back to level 1, something along those lines. You would then, like, you just create your own story for that as well. So a lot of what she says doesn't always make a whole lot of sense in this game, in this book, but it's I think the major problem is we're looking, like Anna and myself are looking at the same solution, but we're taking different approaches to get to that solution. And that's probably because I'm looking at it from 7 years in the future from when she wrote this book. That's not me being arrogant, the book was written in 2011, it's 2018 now, obviously I'm looking at it through a different lens. So, I mean, I agree with her overall message and everything, but it's kind of like, really, this is something I should have read much earlier if I wanted to do a review on it. And unfortunately I'm reading it now, and I'm kind of like, well, she's got a lot of great points, but I mean, a lot of what she's saying has already taken place. So it's not really, doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. She goes through a lot of storytelling of, like, folk games and board games, and how those, it was a weird argument, but how those relate to, like, video games, and she was talking about, like, cross-medium, how certain mediums can get different stories across. And what I would counter her point with is, even in a board game or in a folk game, kids can use their imagination to change, like, the basic structure of the game into anything that they wanted to. I mean, I did this with games when I was bored, and obviously spoiler alert, I didn't have a whole lot of friends growing up, so I would take a board game and I would change around the rules, like, in my head, and be like, okay, so instead of, take a Hero Quest for example, I'm just going to create my own story for this, and it's going to be much better than me having to find friends and sit down and play Hero Quest with a group of people, and somebody has to be the dungeon master and that sort of thing, or creating like a whole new Dungeons and Dragons game, which is something I never played and never really wanted to play, and it's just a way to create something new with existing material. She touches on this a little bit in video games when she talks about ROM hacks and homebrews, which I found really interesting. Simply, I find the idea of homebrews and ROM hacks to be very interesting, particularly ROM hacks, where you take existing material, you sort of change it around, and make a completely new game out of something that already existed. I have a bunch of Castlevania ROM hacks like that, and those are really a lot of fun. And then she goes into her final argument here, which I have a few thoughts on, and I mean, it's fine and everything, because I feel like I really need to say this, I do agree with what she's saying. It's just the way that she's saying it is how I disagree with it. Yeah, and honestly, in conclusion, I agree with her. Everybody should be able to make video games if they want to. Video game creation should be more accessible to people if they want to create those games. But you have to realize that the scope of the game, like the scope of your ambition, might not match the scope of the game that you want to create, because you're going to be limited in basically the style of gameplay that you want and sort of the world that you want to create in this game. It might not match your total vision, and that's fine, because you can keep working towards that ultimate goal in creating like this vast game. But yeah, so I agree with her on that. And also, there's the thing, not everybody wants to make games. Some people just want to sit and enjoy them, and that's perfectly fine too. And it's kind of a weird message, because she's saying that these tools are now more accessible than ever, and I would agree with her, they are. You have many more tools to do so. But don't discount the tools that we had prior to this, where amateur video game players and amateur video game creators had a chance to sort of toy around and at least create like the foundation for something that they wanted to do. And also, if people early on, if they wanted to make games or if they wanted to do programming, they were going to learn how to do it. It wasn't going to stop them. I mean, early DOS-based games were incredibly annoying because you had to actually go through the DOS prompt in order to create it. Or not create it, you had to go through the DOS prompt in order to load the games. That's not something you have to do now. Now Windows makes it a lot easier, where you just... I mean, actually it's even easier than that now, because now you can just go on Steam, download a game, and boom, you don't have to, like, go through all these weird icons and settings and, like, hide the game from your parents because they told you they didn't want this game on your on their computer. Which happened a lot with me. I think my dad originally told us we were allowed to have 2 games on the computer, and that quickly morphed into about 8. So, it was just one of those weird things where he couldn't really stop us from doing it, but he tried. Initially, like very weakly tried to stop us from doing it. It was kind of a funny thing. We just had to, well, at least I just had to hide the, icons and all the programs in like a different file where he couldn't find it, and I knew he wasn't going to be able to find it because he wasn't very tech savvy. But that's just my own experience with computers. But yeah, like, I mean, even now you can look at it, just sort of reading this book now, looking at the way the industry has gone. Yeah, more people can create games now. The problem with that is you have a lot of people creating really terrible games. And thankfully the industry at this point, mostly the consumers, pretty much know, like, okay, this game is garbage, and you have a lot more ways to express how terrible a game is. I think there are some serious issues with the way games are made now, where you have, like, mostly with the big budget games, where they'll get released broken, and they have to, like, do the day one patches to get them to work, or it might be months down the line to where the game actually matches what the developers told you the game was going to be. No Man's Sky is an example of that, where it took them a while to get to get everything that they said they were going to have in the game, and that's kind of understandable when you look at, like, the scope of what they were building. But again, this is me looking back on it with a different lens, going, yeah, the scope in which they said that they were going to do that, that's not really reachable for, like, a day one release for them, but that's all in hindsight. Anyway, final thoughts are, this isn't a book that I'm probably going to go back to read. I would just say that. I'm glad that I read it, but it's not something that I'm going to, like, really go back, read again, or use as, like, a reference material or something like that. You can see the effort. She did put a lot of time into the book, but again, at this point, it's sort of like this was a book for, like, a specific time period, and now when I go back and look at it, I'm like, yeah, this is a little bit dated information, and it's got some stuff in there that I really don't agree with, which I'm not going to touch on because they're not really central to the review. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to try to read something a little bit different. I read a lot about developers and some of the social aspects of gaming. I think I want to move on to something else for next month. But again, thank you guys very much for watching. If there is a particular book about the industry that you guys want me to read, please let me know in the comments below. And have a great month, everybody. I will be back later with a different book review. See you later.